Hello, everybody, and welcome to McCulloch & Miller's Trust 101. Just a quick reminder, you don't have to have your video or your microphone on. Sometimes that's easier for people. So we'll go ahead and get started. My name is Crystal here. I'm the Marketing Director for McCulloch & Miller. For many years, we've presented our workshops in the office and around the community, but now, because of COVID-19, we're doing things online. So we're excited to continue our presentations and hope this is a convenient way for you all to stay up to date with things estate planning. So we'll go ahead and get started. Today's presenter is David Miller, who's our partner and our lead attorney on most estate planning and public benefits matters. David looks forward to answering your questions at the end, but you're welcome to drop the questions into the chat box throughout the presentation. And with that, I'll go ahead and turn the attention over to David. Thank you so much.
Hey, good morning, everybody. My name is David Miller. Like Crystal said, I'm a partner here at the firm McCulloch & Miller, and we are an estate planning and elder law firm. And today, we're here to talk about trust. We call it Trust 101 because we want to make this kind of very high-level, basic education about the uses of a trust and the foundations of a trust. We kind of subtitle it, Why is everyone trying to sell me a trust? And the reason is because a lot of the people that I talk to on a day-to-day basis, they've met with other attorneys, and the attorney said, oh, well, you need a trust, or their friends say they need a trust, or even they come in and they just heard the word trust and they say, I need to write a trust. And they really don't necessarily understand why these are being recommended to them, how they work, or why they're important. So here we're meeting today to talk about kind of how a trust works and why you keep hearing about them and how you use them. And so today we want to talk about, first we want to go through the trust basics. And I want to talk about the basic mechanics of a trust, basic players, how it works. And then we want to talk about the uses of a trust and some of the pros about using a trust. And we'll go through some actual kind of real life case studies of clients that we've helped by using trusts. And then we want to talk about, is it potentially right for you, and some of the drawbacks and what to look for. And then at the end, we'll have some time for question and answers. And so first thing we want to do is the trust basics, right? We want to talk about first, what is a trust? Then we want to talk about who are the players in a trust and the different types of trusts that are out there. And the first thing to understand about a trust is there are really kind of four issues. If you come into our office and you get a trust, at the end of the day, you're going to walk out with a big old stack of paper. A lot of it's legalese. It can be kind of complex in some parts, but all of it answers four basic questions. Who controls, who benefits, the timing of when events are supposed to happen within the trust, and the conditions that have to be met before events happen. And so I was kind of thinking about how to explain a trust and really how it works. And, you know, in this age of coronavirus and COVID-19 and stay-at-home orders, we're all living and dying by our Amazon delivery or our FedEx delivery. And in a lot of ways, a trust is very similar to a package, right? So, you know, take your basic package here, right? A delivery, what's going to happen? You know, somebody is going to come in, they're going to put stuff into this box. They're going to put address on it, where it's going to be delivered, return address. They're going to get it to a delivery person to deliver to the recipient. Right? And in a lot of cases, you're going to have instructions on that box, right? We've seen a lot of these. This end up, keep this box cold, don't put heavy objects on top. And a trust works a lot the same way like a delivery. So I kind of want to take a real world example. I'll use myself for example, right? So you know, I'm a lawyer, I got 2 kids, I got a wife, and I want to pass stuff on to them, make sure that they get it. And so what do I have? I've got, you know, my house here, I got a car, I've actually got a little bit of money, my wife has, you know, her wedding ring and some jewelry that she's gotten from her parents. I'm kind of a little bit of a nerd, and since I was a kid, I've been collecting lead soldiers that my oldest daughter thinks are really, really neat. And ultimately, I want to make sure that my kids, they go out and they get a good education, right? And so I got all this stuff, and I'm carrying it around. I want to make sure it gets to the right person. And so what happens, though, if I trip? What happens if something happens to me? I'm in an accident. I develop a disease, I'm incapacitated, or I pass away. What's going to happen to all this stuff and all these goals? It's going to kind of fall on the floor everywhere. And who's going to pick it up? If you have a will, it's usually the executor, but you want to make sure it's the right person. Are they going to pick up all this stuff? Maybe. Are they going to get it to the right people in the right ways? I don't know. So that's where a trust comes in, right? And so we're going to take our delivery box, right? And what we're going to do is we're going to put stuff in it. I'm going to put my lead soldier collection. I'm going to put all my stuff. I'm going to put my kids' education. I'm going to put this in the box, all right? And I'm going to write some instructions on this box. And you only get this money if you have a 3.0 GPA. You don't get any of this money until you're 35 years old. None of this stuff is to be used for creditors, right? And so I'm going to take this box, I'm going to give it to the delivery guy, the trustee. I'm going to give it to him to hold and deliver to the beneficiaries, my kids, at the right time, and he's got all the instructions written on the box. That's what a trust is, right? And everything about this trust is going to ask the question, who controls, who benefits, the timing, and the conditions. So let's talk about a little more detail here, the players, right? The first big one is the grantor, or also known as the trust maker. We like to use the term trust maker because it's simple. It's the person making the trust. That is the person who is actually designing this box and putting stuff in the box. There's the trustee. The trustee is the delivery man. He is the one that is going to hold that box, follow the instructions, and then give it to the beneficiaries when all the conditions are met. And then, of course, the beneficiary. That's going to be the person who's going to benefit from this trust, who's going to get the stuff coming out. Now, you can have any sorts of combinations of who these players are. For some of our clients, or a lot of our clients who do like a revocable living trust, the grantor, the trustee, and the beneficiary, they're all the same person. But the trustee can change. The beneficiaries can change if something happens. You can have asset protection trusts with different trustees, different beneficiaries. It's any combination here. But these are the three main roles. And then the next thing to think about are the different types of trust. I've written a whole bunch of trusts here, the revocable trust, gun trust, pet trust, insurance trust. It goes on, and this just kind of scratches the surface here. For any sort of problem or scenario, there is a type of trust out there, which is why you hear about them so much, and you hear lawyers talk about trust a lot if you ever meet with an estate planner, because no matter what your situation, there's generally a trust that can solve any sorts of goals or problems that you might have. But we want to talk about generally the different types of trust kind of on a bigger level. So the first two types of categories for a trust are a living trust and a testamentary trust. A living trust is simple. It's a trust that's made during the trust maker's lifetime. The next is what we call a testamentary trust. This is a trust that is made at the time of the trust maker's death. Oftentimes this is done through a will. This is the box where if you get the instructions, if you're opening this box, something terrible has happened to me. That's kind of what a testamentary trust is. The next types of trusts are what we call revocable trust and irrevocable trust. A revocable trust is a trust that can be undone. It can be taken back. The trust maker can give this box to the trustee and say, no, I want that. I want it all back. I want to take everything out of the box. An irrevocable trust is different. Once the stuff goes into that trust, the trust maker cannot take it back. Only the trustee can release that property, only according to the trust instructions. The next big type is a grantor trust and non-grantor trust. This is much more technical, but it has to do with taxes. Most of the trusts that we do here are what are called grantor trusts, which is everything is done under the trust maker's Social Security number. So ultimately, there's really no tax effect for the trust maker. There's also non-grantor trusts, and this is where a trust would get its own social tax ID number, and it's actually going to have a higher tax curve because of that. Like I said, most of the trusts that we do are grantor trusts, so there's no tax effect, but there's different reasons you might want to use a non-grantor trust for business reasons, complex asset protection reasons, but those are really the kind of different categories. And depending on what your goals are, depending on what your needs are, you're going to have different types of trust. You can have a living, irrevocable grantor trust. You can have a testamentary trust. You can have a irrevocable non-grantor trust. It all depends on exactly what you're trying to accomplish. And so we kind of went through the basics here. We went through kind of some complex concepts here, but the big question is why? Why do you do this? What is the purpose of a trust? And there's lots of different purposes here. And this is really kind of where the rubber meets the road. And this is what you really want to think about if you're thinking about, is a trust right for me or not? And this is where we're going to get into your goals and your priorities. Now, one of the #1 uses for trust is to avoid probate. Trusts are a great tool for avoiding probate because once these assets, the stuff, is in that trust, it is out of your estate. And everything happens in the trust pursuant to the trust instructions. So if you pass away, the trustee is going to give your beneficiaries the stuff in the trust. You don't need court interference. You don't need to probate a will. And so what is the benefit of that? Well, one is privacy. If you go to a will, you're going to have to file the will, you're going to have to file an inventory of assets. With the trust, you avoid public disclosure of your assets and who the beneficiaries are. Probate can be an expensive process. In Texas, it's actually not the worst place to do a probate. Some states are much worse than Texas. But if you have a married couple, you're going to have eventually during their lifetime and then ultimately on both of their deaths, you're going to have 2 or more probate proceedings, and you're going to have all the associated costs that come with that. And finally, there's an administrative burden. Even in Texas, where it's pretty simple to do, there's paperwork that has to be filled, there's filings with the court, there's examinations that have to be done. It can be pretty pro forma, but there's a lot of administrative stuff that goes into it, and it can take a while. In an age of coronavirus, when suddenly the court shut down for a month, it can really prolong that period of time that it takes to actually probate a will and ultimately get the benefits of that will. So let's kind of look at a real-world example here. We represented a couple. They did not have a complex estate. They did not have a complex set of instructions or lots of beneficiaries. But what did they have? They had a home in Houston. They had a rental property in Arizona. And the husband actually inherited some mineral rights in Louisiana. And so this is interesting because this is all real property. And real property has to be probated in the state where the property is. And so if you have one couple and 3 properties, you're ultimately going to have 2 probate proceedings, 1 for each couple, and you're going to have 1 in every state where it is. That is a total of 6 different probates that's going to happen for this one couple. That is welfare for lawyers. I mean, that is a lawyer's dream because that is money, money, money. And there's no reason that this couple would have to do that. By putting all these assets into a trust, they're not going to have any probate proceedings. And while a trust might be a little more expensive to set up on the front end, they're going to save tens of thousands of dollars in avoided probate costs. So what's another use? Another big use is asset protection. So who needs asset protection? Well, asset protection can mean a lot of different things. With certain types of trusts, you can protect your own assets during your own lifetime from future creditors. You can protect your assets upon your death from future spouses. That could be the future spouse of your wife after you pass away. It could be future spouses of your children. And you want to make sure that your money that you worked hard for goes to the people that you want, not some new spouse that you may or may not have ever met before. You can protect assets from your beneficiaries, future creditors. So, you never want to have a situation where you have a child who's gotten in a wreck and is getting sued for $1 million and then they inherit your money. Creditors can get at that. But with a trust, you can protect that and make sure it doesn't happen. And then you can protect assets from the government. We do a lot of public benefit planning at our firm here, and one of the big things we're always worried about is the Medicaid or state recovery program. But making sure that money is in trust and not in the estate, the government can't get it. If you don't use a trust and that money is in your estate or that property is in your estate, it's fair game for the government down the road after you pass away. So again, how could you use this, right? So consider a couple with $500,000, right? And Anna Nicole Smith moves in next door. We all know who Nicole Smith was. She was a very young bombshell who married a billionaire and resulted in decades of probate fights. So when the wife passes away, what's going to happen with her money? What happens when Anna Nicole Smith knocks on the door after the funeral asking for a cup of sugar? This is where money can get flittered away to people that you don't want to have it. And by using a trust, you can protect your assets to make sure that money is used for your spouse, and only your spouse, and then your kids, and only your kids, and not somebody else. Another big use of trust is to maintain control. And this can mean a bunch of different things. This could be maintain control of your assets during your own lifetime by avoiding guardianship. It can maintain control over what happens to your assets after you pass away. And the way you do this, and this is the instructions on the box, right? This is how we maintain control. We write in the instructions. You can only get this money if you get a 3.0 GPA. And you can only get this money if you're maintaining the values that I'm trying to pass on, the conditions I pass on. And so we can look at, you want to pass on education. You want to write in those instructions. You want to make sure they're still working hard and not living off their inheritance. You can write in those instructions. And of course, a big problem is spendthrifts and substance abusers, which is unfortunately a growing problem in our society. And you can want to provide for them. You can write into the trust to make sure that they're cared for and that there's money there for their care, but only their care, and not for something that's going to be detrimental to them. So consider this scenario. You have an 80-year-old widow. She has about $300,000 home. She's got $450,000 in assets, retirement savings she's accumulated, some that she got from her husband. She's got some savings. And she doesn't have a lot of family except her one grandson. And she loves her grandson. He's a nice guy. He's very polite. He cares for her. He helps her out. And he lives in her basement, and he doesn't have a job. In fact, he's only had 15 jobs, none of which lasted more than 2 months. She wants him to get her money when she passes. She wants him to get this stuff. But she also wants to make sure she passes on the value of hard work. And so you can write that in. We've done trusts where somebody only gets money after they present a W-2 to the trustee. And then the trustee will look at their W-2 earnings and say, okay, you made so much money, we'll match you dollar for dollar, or $2 for every dollar that you earn. And that way you can incentivize somebody to make sure that they're working and pass on those values. We use trust for public benefits planning. Our firm has done lots of webinars and workshops before on Medicaid and public benefits and issues associated with the cost of long-term care, and it's a big issue. You know, the long-term care can be extremely expensive, and if you don't have the means to pay for it or you don't have insurance that's going to pay for it, ultimately you might be relying on government benefits. And the catch there is to get those government benefits, you have to be broke. But through the use of trust planning ahead of time, we can actually preserve a lot of those assets on the side. And those assets can be used to supplement your care, supplement your quality of life, all while you're still getting government benefits, Medicaid, long-term care benefits, and then hopefully have something left to pass on to your beneficiaries that the government can't go and sue your estate for. So an example of this is we have a client, a couple they're about 65 years old, and they have about $1.5 million. They have a good amount of savings, and they're both physically healthy. You know, they're probably going to live a long time, but the husband has early onset Alzheimer's, and so they're looking at a situation where they might be paying for 10 years of very expensive memory care for him. And that's going to eat through all of their money, all of their savings. What's going to be left to care for her? What happens if she has long-term care needs? Do they want all of their work and all of their savings to go into the black hole that is our medical system? No, they want it for their use and their enjoyment and to pass it on to their children. And so through trust planning, we're able to qualify them for those Medicaid benefits and make sure that they can pay for their long-term care while preserving their assets. There's lots of additional other uses. We're just scratching the surface here. But some of the big ones: avoiding guardianship, avoiding estate taxes. Estate taxes right now really aren't that big of a priority because the thresholds are so high. But the law is going to change. It's going to change soon in 2025. And those thresholds are going to come down, and people might be looking all of a sudden at having a taxable estate. So through proper trust planning, you can do a lot of tax avoidance. You can ensure that your assets are properly managed during your lifetime after you pass away. You can ensure a family legacy, the family farm sort of situation. You can avoid will contests. You can always litigate anything. Lawyers will always find a way, but it's a lot harder to bust a trust than it is to make a stink in a will contest. Privacy and identity protection. We have some clients that are using trust so that they can make their victim's identity theft, and they want to make sure it never happens again. So, for example, we have a couple live here in Houston. They have 7 children. They have a 100-acre farm in Iowa that that's been their family for 75 years. And they want to keep that farm intact. They want it there in their family for the next couple of generations, right? They don't want, upon their death, for it to be sold and all the money split amongst the children. So what can we do? We can put the farm in a trust, and we can write instructions about how that farm is to be cared for and what's going to happen to that farm. This couple actually has 2 issues, right? Because they live here in Houston and their farm's in Iowa. So that's actually going to be multiple probate proceedings. So they're going to avoid probate of that farm. They're going to avoid that cost. They're going to make sure that farm remains intact. So you say, great, David, this is great. It's all these wonderful uses. Why doesn't everyone have one, right? Well, there are drawbacks to a trust, right? And you have to understand that going in before you commit your assets to a trust, and you want to think about whether or not this is right for you. So let's talk about some of the drawbacks of a trust. On an upfront basis, there's slightly higher costs. Our firm will charge more for trust than we will for a will because they are more complex. There's more work that goes into them at the front end. We believe, depending on the situation, it's generally going to save you a lot more money on the back end than the little amount extra that it charges over a will, but it is a higher cost. Now, there's an administrative burden, right? You've got to set up the trust. You got to have all the legal documents. You got to set up new accounts. You got to fund the trust, and you got to maintain the trust. And there is some administrative burden that goes along with that. Trusts need to be updated for changed conditions. because you have so many players, especially with the trustee, because assets can be changing in their nature or in their amount, you're going to have to update your trust on a fairly regular basis to make sure it continues to solve the problems or address the issues that you were trying to address in the first place. Irrevocable trust, they are irrevocable. You know, that is a big deal. Once you put that stuff in this box, you can't take it back, and that's something that has to be considered before you do something like an irrevocable trust. And there are other alternatives. There are easier probate avoidance, for instance, that for certain types of assets. So, for instance, if someone comes in and they say, I really want to avoid probate, but the only thing I have is a house, well, we can do that fairly easily without having to set up a trust and having all these cons of a trust. So there are other techniques that should be considered, but again, this is where you want to sit down with an estate planner and really consider what are your goals, what are your priorities, what types of assets do you have? You know, the amount of assets is one thing, but the types of assets that you have are also another thing. What are the other options available to you? And finally, does the trust you're going to get actually fit your personal needs? I've got a picture here of a conveyor belt of Amazon boxes, right? And that's what you don't want. You don't want to go into a place where you're going to get a trust and it's going to be the same trust for everybody and they're just going to put your name in the blank spaces, right? That's what we call a trust mill, and that's not what you want, right? You want to make sure a trust is tailor-made specifically for you and is there only to address your issues and make sure it actually accomplishes your goals and not just giving you some sort of administrative burdens for the sake of having a trust. But again, the best thing to do is to actually sit down with a qualified estate planner and talk through your goals and see if this is right for you and see if it's right for your type of assets or your family. And so what could you do? Well, if you're interested in this, you can always contact our firm. You can get a free consultation where you can sit down with an attorney, tell us your situation, tell us your priorities, and we'll give you an analysis of what are the possibilities, what are your options, how are those different options going to address your personal situation, and ultimately it's going to give you some peace of mind to make sure that you can say to yourself and to your family, hey, I've thought about this, we put some work into it to make sure that when I trip and fall and I'm holding all my stuff, it doesn't go everywhere, that I'm actually going to have my stuff go to the right people, be controlled in the right way, and happen at the right time with the right conditions. So if you're interested, you can contact our firm. Here's our information, and at this point in time, I'd like to turn it over to